My name's Lachlan at an early stage investment fund called Cosmos. I guess we'll do a quick round of introductions. You go, Gil.
I'm Gil. Whoa, I'm Gil. Gil Rosen. I run Stanford's Blockchain Accelerator and the BAS Conference Series and managing partner at Blockchain Builders Fund.
Hey guys. Yeah, I'm Ani. I'm a partner at Dragonfly. We're a cross-border crypto fund. We manage a few billion in crypto, but yeah.
Hey everyone, my name is Christian, and I'm an investor over at Coin Fund.
Awesome. So I guess to start off with, I think it's good to understand the kind of constraints, like what kind of limitations that existing centralized AI models, this kind of environment has to actually understand whether AI and crypto is a narrative, a fad, or whether it's irrationally exuberant at the same time. So I guess let's just get straight into it and understand what are the problems with centralized AI that we currently are seeing today.
I mean, I think AI has the power to break the world. And it's the whole accelerationist versus decelerationist fight back and forth of okay, potentially get to a place of AGI where is this general intelligence that is way smarter than us. We have all of these centralized digital platforms that it can run rampant on, have access to all of our data, all of our identities, and kind of, if you can't control it and it can hack into systems. I don't know if you guys ever read the book Nexus, but it's scary future. So yeah, I mean, there's a huge problem with centralized AI. You don't know what's in the model. You don't know who's running the model. You don't know what the model was trained on, what bias it has. You don't know what data it was trained on. You don't know if the model is what you think it is. So huge problems there. Whether blockchain or not, I think sure later we'll get to how blockchain can potentially solve that.
Well, I think when we first started seeing the wave of decentralized AI in general, I think so many of the people on the Dragonfly team actually had worked in AI or started AI companies before joining the team. And one of our big questions was always, does this really need venture funding? Because many AI projects might require, I don't know, a few $100,000 to get started. Some, on the other hand, like OpenAI, as we all know, are on the order of nation states, right? So it's the only way to kind of compete is to come with a war chest that you could actually win, because otherwise there's no point playing. And so that was one of our first questions. But I think, so Gil gave a book recommendation. I'll give one other one, I think, on the opposite end, Cable Cowboys, because I think the current stage of AI right now is very much like the early days of telecommunications, whereby people put in billions of dollars into cables underneath the ocean, over land and sea, to try to combine the world in this sort of globalist viewpoint. And basically everyone ended up losing money, right? So you can have these cases whereby you have very promising technology. All of us here believe AI is very transformative, it's going to change the world, all those things. But it can still be very hard to build a business despite those tailwinds, right? And so I think that's the problem for venture and for founders, which is you have to be both directionally correct and correct on the timing. And if you miss one of those, there's no company, right? And so if you go back to that time with the telecommunications era, it's yeah, people were very smart and precision. Cisco stock went up 30x, I believe, in 2 years. The next 15 kind of saw this great stagnation, right? And I think our job for everyone here is to make sure that doesn't happen. So,
I think going to the question on constraints and limitations that are introduced, it's important to recognize that inherently by operating over a distributed system, you're introducing latency and communication overhead. A model trained on Jensen is never going to be faster than something that's trained in a centralized manner, right? This is something we have to be incredibly realistic about. I think it's easy to think of blockchain and AI as an ultimate convergence, but fundamentally they're tackling different things. So as Gil had kind of alluded to before, right? The way that I view AI is it's the software revolution of the future, and what blockchain and distributed technology can bring to it is economies and parameters around which distribution and open and equitable ways becomes more realistic and pragmatic. And there's going to be trade-offs, right? And so the trade-offs, I think, primarily that I see are speed and latency in kind of delivering a lot of these real-time use cases. In some places this is applicable, in some places it's not, right? It's not that all AI engineers today need to be working in a manner that is applies blockchain technology in a fundamental way. But what I think is really fascinating is there's these really deep intersections where The convergence of the two technologies makes a ton of sense, right? And so it's like unification of compute. There's like the amount of like latent supply of compute that exists in the world outside of like centralized servers is ever increasing over time. Creating a unification layer for different kind of specific tasks is going to be something really fascinating that we're going to see evolve over time. The data layer is fundamentally, I think, over the next 2-3 years, going to be the most important segment that we're seeing iterate on top of AI. And a fundamental unification of that is going to be blockchain technology, tapping into different siloed ecosystems and being able to do it in a privacy-preserving, incentivizing way. And so, yeah, I guess, yeah, bringing it back to what you were talking about, I think there's a lot of trade-offs which we have to be realistic about, which I think like makes where we should be putting energy very specific. But yeah.
Can I jump in here? So, agree with a lot of what you said. I think actually on the trade-offs, especially things like around latency, I think for inference that matters because you're in the middle of a workflow, you want to check, do some call on some AI model. I actually think on training, like latency isn't as important because you're not training your data in real time. Like usually you're training your model like once, quarter, month, week, whatever it is, or like slightly on an ongoing basis. But that's so like from the Jensen use case, I actually don't think it's as critical. I think for like other like inference use cases, that actually matters a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think like the worldview that there's going to be a single LLM, which is like going to fit all use cases, is not the one that I ascribe to. There's in fact going to be a huge long tail of models, of which cheaper network where you trade off some latency could make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think like it's fitting towards, right?
Yeah.
But it's, I guess like, yeah, the clarification.
And that's not where we are now. Right now we have like 4 models, right? We've got AI, we've got Anthropic, we've got Google, and like, what is it? Tesla's Grok, whatever. And like that's a scary place where everything is incredibly centralized. Every application is being built on AI, like these LLM model, these like large language models by these 4 has platform risk. Literally, they could raise their prices and tomorrow it's gone. They can change something and then tomorrow, like you have no control over your underlying infrastructure. And to me, that's a really scary place to be.
Yeah, what I would say there is, I think, one thing I've noticed, even being here today, is that, and I think this is kind of an issue in the broader decentralized AI space, is that like AI research is very sexy, but AI products are not. And so you come to these things and like people talk about, kind of creating models that I think have to go head to head with like Q-Star or Llama or something else like that. But these things are not really products, right? Like the average person does not care about any of these things. It's not going to bring the next billion people into crypto, right? Which is still like a major problem for us. We still all exist in the infra stage of crypto, right? And we have to kind of cross the chasm of trying to get all those people interested in both, hopefully AI, crypto, and then actually like using all this stuff. But yeah, I'd just be kind of interested in your guys' takes, like what products you think will hopefully be built off these models that we couldn't do before.
From a product standpoint? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like it's actually something pretty interesting to track. If you look, like the retention and activity of ChatGPT is something that's gone down like over the summer, right? Like when kids weren't in school and like just using it for homework, like AI is still fitting a use case, and I think the fundamental bottleneck to a lot of that is coordinating data. Like hallucinations are kind of like some of the major things that are preventing this actually being built into like applicable systems that can be running and operating business today. And the coordination mechanism of this is like fitting this with like real and applicable data. This exists like in the blockchain sense, but like in literally every other application as well. This is where like companies are going to be building moats, and I think this is where like there's a huge opportunity to kind of like build data protocols to work on these kind of things.
Yeah, one idea I had there, I think that's uniquely made possible by AI x crypto, is on the attribution layer, whereby, I don't know if people here have seen like the New York Times lawsuit of OpenAI. I think that's quite a strong harbinger of the future because these models need to get trained from somewhere, but the tracking of attribution is something that crypto can do 100x better than any other way we have right now. And I think that scaled is probably what will bring people into the space, right? Because attribution is what made Google, has what, kind of created the modern web, and I think we'll do the same for crypto.
And I think there's 2 parts to this. There's the user-generated content space, which I think like UGC and actually one of our team's characteristics is right there. Like in the UGC space, that's if we think about where blockchain really works is when you have like decentralized creation of content, and that's great for like social, for games. And how do you simplify user-generated content like generative models? Can't have the potential for. We're still very early in all this. So I think if you can make that, like in the music industry, you had all of like the home studio kind of created an entire new generation of like artists. You could do that now for gaming. You could do that for almost any type of content. To me, like, and the democratization of content generation is a huge driver into the blockchain space because you're trying to disintermediate these large platforms that you don't have control over. So like that's one part.
Well, the other thing that I think people here are not thinking about is that the modern web is like proliferated with AI agents, right? And we have no way, even at this point, even in crypto. I mean, like there was an AI agent day yesterday, and it's unbelievable the progress of bots, like non-humans essentially trading or like creating activity in crypto, and that is something that like crypto itself can solve in the age of AI, right? It's like, how do you know you're talking to a person or not? The rise of deepfakes, AI agents, all those things create a necessary like skill or carbitis situation where it's like only crypto can solve that, right? So our portfolio company Spindle, which does attribution, is kind of tracking that with all these like AI agent platforms because AI agents want to get paid just like everyone else, right? Like we'll soon see AI minimum wage, I guess, and that'll be like a heated topic at some point. But yeah, these things will happen, and then we're not ready.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that the focus in some arenas of AI is thinking how AI and human users will interface. I actually think like in like 5 years, that's going to be like 2% of use cases. Like it's going to be AI, inter-AI communications, which are like the dominant method in which just like technology and systems will work. And what is blockchain if not like a permissionless coordination layer for that?
Right. It's basically public digital infrastructure, and if you have like literally millions of AI agents interacting with each other, like where's that going to run? Should that be running on some sort of like private digital platform that's owned by Google and has control? Like that doesn't make sense. So like that's certainly part of it from a digital infrastructure perspective. And then to your point, like I think that's like I say AI literally will break the world, right? It will break truth. You'll have no idea what's real, what's not, what's been like who created this content, if the content was edited, how was it edited. So this idea of having provenance across all layers of content and how content was generated, who generated an attestation, to me becomes really critical. I think we're early. I think like it needs to break first. We need to have these deep fakes, and then we'll start like realizing that you need to have identity, you need to have like provenance layers for all data. You need to have like some way of proving that the editing that has gone on this video hasn't changed it so that it's not like Biden being forced to say something to like a little child, which was like a couple years ago, or like Trump saying something, right?
Got it. So you guys are talking about a lot of like coordination and incentives design as well. So like interested to understand from your perspective, like how does token distribution mechanics like fit within this world? I think blockchains are well known for that in some sense, like distributing tokens to coordinate some behavior of these like unbeknown individuals, right? So how does like tokens and these like elixir of ownership sit in here?
Yeah, so I brought up Spindle before. So I think one of the big problems in crypto today is what do we do with like Sybil resistance, right? Like how do we know who we're giving tokens to? A lot of these L1s, I mean, I don't need to name names, like everyone runs the same strategy now, but we're airdropping billions of dollars worth of tokens to potentially the same people, to AI agents, many of whom just dump the thing immediately, right? And you could almost think about that as like a communist cash grab, whereby it is private capital that is then being distributed to people we don't know about. Like if it was a Web2 economy, shareholders would outcry, right? That's like not okay. You can't just like give your money in a way that doesn't make sense like that. So I think when we think about, what we were talking about before, the attribution layer or like rise of AI with this, hopefully spotting these threats becomes much easier over time, and we can like accurately give people these tokens. And tokens in some other sense are actually advertisements. And like when people buy your token, you're expecting them to hold. And if they just dump it, then we're no different than Web 2, right? It just becomes like the same cash grab all over again.
I think of like the role of tokens potentially in this like indirect AI relationship of the AI ecosystem. So currently we have these 4 large models. That's primarily what people are using for most applications. Like Databricks has a whole workflow that lets you like build these things in. And really what matters now for most of these applications, if you're building an AI startup, is the data that you're building it on, right? And the training data is very hard to come by for very specific use cases, whether you're building something like HVAC or for customer support in healthcare or insurance or whatever it is. So getting access to these data sets is key. And to me, like the best way to motivate and incentivize like millions of people to create these custom data sets for these AI models is like the token-based economy. So, like that's one part. I think also we need to break this monopoly of these 4, the quadropoly, whatever it would be called, of these 4 by having more, like incentivizing people to create additional open source types of models and different versions of models that can be monetized as they're used. And I think, like again, having a token-based ecosystem to incentivize people to create models, to then use those models, and have a more decentralized AI ecosystem is critical.
For sure. I think now I want to get a little bit more spicy. So spicy takes only. So I think we've kind of forgotten that you kind of touched on some of the inherent trade-offs, and I think we forget that we exist in like very resource-constrained environment. You have gas limits, you have these kind of things, right? And I think we've seen some use cases that don't take that into consideration whatsoever, right? So like, what are some of the use cases that we've seen, or like perceived use cases that we've seen that just are over-indexed on or don't really make sense in a like distributed systems environment?
The reality is doing anything provable in AI right now costs a crap ton of money and is slow, right? So it's just like trying to do a ZK proof on an AI model, like good luck. And again, one of our Modulus Labs is working on that, and they're like working on optimizing the crap out of that. Another one, Nexus Labs is also working on optimizing that, but we're still far away from that being viable. For like super, I just talk too loud. That's the problem. I'll just hold the mic here. I think the reality is that we're early from an infrastructure perspective, being able to like prove models. While the need is there, that use case isn't necessarily there yet.
How do you think about the demand side for proving models?
The reality is, I don't think the world is broken yet, right? I think if we look at like the Web2 space in financial services and healthcare, well, like we have SOC 2 compliance, we have like Basel 2 compliance in the UK. We have all of these compliance mechanisms that require Web2 institutions to monitor what the code they're running and what data is running through it and how it's being run. I think and then we have like actual audits and human auditors that go and look at this. I think we'll get to a place that it will either be easier, faster, cheaper to use blockchain to monitor and audit, or like it'll just be so complex to do anything in AI that you'll have to use blockchain. But we're not there yet. I'd like to get to a place where it's legislated that you have to have like blockchain governance on AI models. Casper Labs is literally working with IBM for that, for like, can you do governance on AI within B2B use cases?
Yeah, you kind of make a salient point there. Like our institutions are not, I mean, one big kind of hurdle that everyone here has to face is that our institutions, are from like the 1950s, right, at best. Many of them are like from a time before that, in like antediluvian weird way. And we're living in the era of like 2075, 2100, and you're trying to retrofit things that like we can't even comprehend in institutions that should have died hundreds of years ago, right? So I think for the people here that I think are very motivated, I would probably recommend what does the first like software-driven institution look like? I mean, I think, there are a few people that have tried to do this, but I think for this to really hit scale in the decentralized AI sense, there has to be like a software institution built from the ground up versus, something in the old world, so to speak.
I think Gil was touching on a really interesting point in that both private computation and verifiable computation are things that people have been working on for a long time, but are not currently adopted. Depending on who you talk to, verifiable computation introduces something like 10 to the 6th to 10 to the 9th overhead on just like a normal execution of a program that you would have. So there's like really this question of like why are we like what would you possibly like why would you want to do this and pay so much more for your computation, right? But in the same way, if you like look back many years to the first instance of the web, where we were just doing surfing before public key encryption was introduced on the internet, there was no trust in a client server model where I would go in, put my credit card information and purchase things online, right? And so this like rose, like when this was just adopted as a general standard that, okay, like communication has to be encrypted between networks, it just like, it just introduced like a whole slew of use cases that probably 5 years before that people couldn't have even conceived of. And the next iteration of this is really going to be not just like that communication is encrypted, but that all computation is going to be done in a way that is both verifiable and private. And in a world where most computation is being run through AI models, this is like where that really interesting overlap is coming. And where I think like blockchain holds a foothold within this is in the sense that like what is the biggest use case of proving systems today is like building rollups for execution of chains, and this is happening adjacent to what the next layer of adoption is going to be, which is I think honestly something that's much bigger than just like scaling Ethereum and things like this. It's about redefining a new instance of the web.
Yeah, so how important do you think that privacy part actually is, right? Because all these models supposedly one day, hopefully, will be in some on-chain environment, right? And you have adversarial learning attacks, have it like in training as well. So how important is things like FHE, MPC, in a combination with ZKPs as well, potentially?
I think it's really the fundamental bottleneck that we see in terms of like really large mainstream adoption of AI today. If you like talk to a lot of people who are working at these big institutions like Ani was talking about, and many times, like if you work at a bank today, like you can't use ChatGPT. It's like blocked under server. People aren't using AI, right? Like Bloomberg paid OpenAI billions of dollars to train like a internal fine-tuned model because data sensitivity is like the fundamental issue that everyone here is concerned about, because that's ultimately where value is going to be derived to. Model weights, model structures are going to be commoditized over time in my view, and it's really like the data that's going to be the important part of this. And fundamentally, how do you underwrite data? Through enabling privacy in different ways. There's a bunch of different approaches to it. There's teams like Zama that are developing TFHE solutions for kind of like encrypting or doing computation on top of encrypted data. There's other teams that are, like you had mentioned, working on kind of MPC-based solutions to kind of like distribute computation over a network that is a lot cheaper to do today. It's hard to really predict when costs are going to scale down to a point where this becomes table stakes, but I think that the view is over time, that's what's going to happen.
Do you think that'd be like the one use of privacy that actually forms like a sustained piece of demand?
I mean, I think there's a few different parts of this, right? There's the ZKP part of it, which is less around privacy and more around provability and authenticity. And then there's the privacy part of it, which is like FHE and yes, also like zero knowledge processing from a privacy perspective. I'm excited by the prospect of FHE, but like if AI adoption is a year out and AI blockchain adoption is probably around like two years out plus at scale, I think FHE is like where ZK was 3 years ago. Like for healthcare, I think it's healthcare and banking both, I think are perfect use cases for FHE, where you don't want centralized institutions. You want to be able to have, like, you have multiple parties in an ecosystem that you want to be collaborating with each other and sharing information on a common platform. Makes sense, but it all needs to be extremely private for whether, you know, on the healthcare side, obviously there's legislation and people don't want their private healthcare information out there, and on the financial transaction side for any number, all the obvious reasons. So like,
Yeah, what I would say there, I think, is privacy is necessary but not sufficient. And so I think empirically, like bringing up healthcare as an example, Novartis got sued a few years ago because they paid $300 million because they couldn't care enough to actually secure their data layer, right? So they would rather pay the fine instead of really caring about their privacy layer, right? And I mean, even in consumer internet, you see that all the time where Facebook would rather pay $500 million, maybe what they make in like a week, to the EU instead of like really tightening the screws and like making sure that like people's data is safe, right? So I think you need privacy. It's like very important, But this goes kind of full circle back to what we were saying, right? Where it needs to exist within great products. Like what's hard is not privacy, security really. What's hard is building great products that people want, right? And the farther you get away from that, I mean, one of the things that we discuss internally at Dragonfly is that there's about 3 areas of crypto that have historically made great businesses: chains, exchanges, and stablecoins. And the farther people have historically got away from one of them, it's been very difficult to actually build a killer business. And I think privacy has to exist within one of those things. And many people right now are betting on things like ZK Sync or things like just great, phenomenal teams that I think have really cracked technical breakthroughs. But it'd be interesting to see privacy play out in these other areas too.
I guess to more concretely answer what the use case is, I think there's a time in the future when all computation is private computation. So it will literally touch everything. That's my...
I also think from a social media perspective, like more and more these large platforms that we interact with, whether it's Google, Chrome, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, like every digital platform you enter into, it knows everything about you and it's trying to distract you to get you to buy shit, right? So we're losing more and more control over our agency within digital platforms because these are private closed platforms. And in large part because AI enables them to know really well what we're gonna want, when we're gonna want it, and how to manipulate us to do shit. So I think like there is starting to be a backlash, and I think like at some point, I hope things like, maybe it's not Farcaster and Lens, but like I use Farcaster probably more than I use Twitter right now, which is interesting. I haven't really used a lot of decentralized applications, but I think we're gonna get to a place where you care about privacy of your own data, and you're gonna want to have your AI models that you want running for you and your benefit locally on your phone and on your devices without releasing your data or having to rely on these like cloud AI platforms doing everything for you because you don't have control over them.
Do you not think that's related to people trying to maximize their own financial benefits selling data instead of like their privacy?
I think it's a mix of, yes, you want to monetize your data, but honestly, there aren't that many platforms where people have been able to monetize data that have been successful, right? People have been doing like, monetize your Facebook, your social data for years. I think it's more like people at some point just, you look at the Senate hearings on Facebook and TikTok, and the huge worry there was like, our children's information and data is being used to manipulate them and do things that they can't control. I think people are going to want to have more agency over the data content and models that they and their children interact with.
All right, let's get into some. I'd like to touch on some kind of concrete examples of AI-enabled dApps within crypto today. So not like we're not just speculating on some like meme coin, right? Like some actually verified things, like perhaps using it to make assertions around vulnerability of code, anything around that, DeFi parameterization, these kind of things as well. Like what is actually happening today that we can point to and go, oh, like it's not just a narrative.
Totally. I think that's a great question. I think that at the application level, where we're seeing the most adoption right now is particularly within DeFi. And like, I think within the DeFi use cases of AI and Web3, you're also seeing, I guess, like a natural fitting that happened where it's not just about like using the most advanced technology, right? People always love talking about language models and generative AI use cases in Web3, whereas I think like the most obvious use case today is in tree-based ML algorithms that have been around for a long time, right? And so what are teams like Modulus and Upshot working on? They're working on basically verified ML strategies for actively managing an LP pool or deploying different kinds of DeFi strategies, right? You have other teams like Spectral Finance that are using this for like on-chain credit analysis. I think like where this matters the most, like and where efficiency matters the most is in kind of these financial use cases and applications. And that's what I'm seeing at least, yeah.
Yeah, I think on the more consumer sense, like companies like MyShow, I think are quite compelling because we're seeing this bifurcation already happen in AI across the world, where the use cases, say in Asia, are very different to like those you might see in the States, right? So just kind of like how when mobile phones were first introduced in China, people kind of went straight there versus like how it took forever for mobile banking to actually exist in America. And I think the same thing is playing out with like character generation models that you might see with things like MyShow, where people are spending most of their day talking to these like AI characters, right? And like character AI, things like that in the Web2 case have just been like going infinite. And we were always interested as VCs in like, what the next consumer revolution would be. I think it probably is already here and people just don't know enough, right? That the fact it's already happening and like people are exchanging, to your point, like their financial information, they're conducting transactions with AI agents. I think that's pretty cool and something crazy that MyShell has pulled off.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I mean, I look at like Modulus, again, one of our earlier teams that's doing provable like ML models, ZKML. It's like their customers are literally that, right? It's like WorldCoin, Upshop, Topshop. It's gaming, like AI Arena. It's gaming and DeFi. Again, we're seeing a lot in that gaming and social space, and character generation, people wanting to create content. I think the reason ChatGPT took off to such a degree, and blockchain by and large has not, is also down to usability, right? It's like you took AI and ML, which were incredibly unusable and difficult and non-approachable technologies, and you create an interface that anyone could quickly and easily interact with and gain value from. Blockchain has had a horrible user experience for a very long time, and we basically bribed our users with tokens. I think AI, the combination of the two is can AI be this interface for everything within this super complex, like technical platform, and I think that's going to drive a lot of adoption.
Yeah, let me take it from an opposite way to what I just said too. So I think the other use case that we've been seeing is AI applied to deepen in general. And so what I kind of mean by that is one of our portfolio companies, Andrina, is kind of the inverse of Helium, whereby they go to these big buildings and they put up these like amazing Wi-Fi routers, what people call like the Tesla or broadband, connected to Helium miners. And so I think they're the biggest miners of Helium globally. But they're using AI to kind of optimize the process across the stack, right? And I think however that happens, I think, if it saves them like a few seconds, a few minutes on the mining or on the optimizing of Wi-Fi and the hardware, that all those cost savings go back to the consumer, right? And people have been loving that. Just like, I don't remember the last time people were excited about getting like their internet bill.
Well, not like specific use case. Within VC Mindshare, I mean, you've seen so much things around like democratized GPU marketplaces and like these kind of implementations, right? Like, do you think that makes sense? Is it irrational to be able to like get $500 million valuations, these kind of things, when it's implemented theoretically? There's latency considerations that are rarely discussed. Like, does that market make sense at all, you think?
As someone who's supported and invested, I hope so.
You can chill with it, it's okay.
I think there's a very broad set of use cases, right? You have smaller, faster inference models that need to be run. You have small training sets. You have large training sets, right? Especially on the training side of things, where you often have flexibility on time. Really, Amazon, Azure, and Google are pricing to the highest value buyer that they can have, which are going to be like large enterprise. So taking advantage of like underutilized compute that exists, the underutilized assets, makes complete sense. The challenge with that is often it's with like consumer chips and consumer GPUs, which are not able to often like handle large training even like an inference model with 175 billion parameters, which is what you have with GPT. So like we've been supporting folks in the space that are looking at how do you optimize consumer chips so that you can have more decentralization and expand that supply of what's possible. But whether it's what IO.net is doing, where they have like fully decentralized clusters and they've managed to optimize that well enough, whether it's what Akash has, which is they have clusters that are decentralized, like a decentralized platform that has clusters on it. Like the idea that there is this constrained resource, there are all of these available underutilized assets, how do we utilize them? To me, that does make sense.
What I would say is that I think, a bit of a lopsided example here is how Levi's, the denim company, started off selling picks and shovels during the California gold rush and then started selling jeans. In much the same way, I think, like these people that are trying to capture the ARB on GPUs or chips or whatever will have to either create a horizontal mode and go very wide or create a vertical mode and go very deep and kind of full stack, right? And that might require some crazy pivots. But I think the age of AI right now is also an age of the land grab. And whoever captures the most land, sea, whatever, will have to like win. This is like the first game, right? Where I think a lot of this will become commoditized. But then the question with AI and crypto is always, what are people going to do with it? And where do you take the business, right? I think that's like the most exciting part where do you want to go horizontal? Do you want to go vertical? And how do you do that?
I think that in the interim, as Anya had mentioned, it's a fantastic business opportunity, but to expect that there's going to be an ARB that exists over a long period of time, I don't really think is realistic. I don't know, the history of like building businesses and models is kind of like that of like finding the right market timing. And so there's honestly a fantastic opportunity for a lot of these networks to find some market timing, but over time, differentiation is going to be found by those who are able to build the right supply side in terms of like finding where demand really is and fitting those use cases is the name of the game, right? I think that, you know, NVIDIA earnings continue to go up and people continue to be really, really excited about what's happening at a chip level. But over time, it's technology that's going to be commoditized, right? I think like in really, really long term, technology and compute like will exponentially scale. But in the interim, like there's going to be a realistic question where some of these GPU marketplaces are going to have to find customers, and as like the bottleneck is solved over 24, which I think is something we honestly expect to see. Then you're going to have this question of like, okay, like why is a conventional AI software company going to a GPU marketplace versus a cloud compute provider that now has had their supply constraints solved, right? And I think those dimensions really like lend to like the use cases that deal with heavier computation, right? Where it's not just about like doing rentals of GPUs across a distributed network, but how are you actually distributing workloads of incredibly computationally heavy tasks across a wide network? And that's where things like decentralized training, decentralized fine-tuning, I think are really fascinating to me personally. It's going to be very fascinating to watch these GPU marketplaces evolve over the current year. But competition is going to be really stiff.
And I think we're going to last 2-3 minutes. So I'd like to touch on like what are some non-consensus that you have in utilization of this connection that are generally like underexplored on Twitter, or even what are you seeing in like deal flow, these kind of things as well. Like what is non-consensus or generally just underexplored? Yeah.
So I think a prediction I have for 2024 is one of two things is going to happen in the conventional AI world. Either we're going to see an open source model with open source weights and data set surpass or equal benchmarks of GPT-4, or we're going to see a hack of the model weights of one of these large providers. One of those two things is going to happen. I think it's incredibly realistic that we expect those things. And so I think there's this huge opportunity for blockchain as a catalyst for open source technology. Teams like News Research are working very, very closely at this intersection. Like finding the depth of the use case is still something that we need to figure out, but it's what I'm incredibly excited about because I think open source software is, you saw it with Linux, like something that over time, like even though they were trailing kind of like more centralized operating systems early on, the evolution of the space is that how can a team, even with the war chests of Google and OpenAI and Facebook, compete with millions and millions of developers that are contributing towards the next generation of software? Something incredibly powerful. How is blockchain going to tap into it? It's going to be something exciting to see.
I hope so.
Yeah, I have two things. I think the first is that even though it might seem disgusting to many, a lot of decentralized AI companies will probably need a Web2 business model to succeed. And to backstop the token, a lot of them will use the Web2 revenue they get to backprop the token. And they won't want to do that, and it's going to be a very hard governance proposal, but that's probably going to happen. Is that many of these decentralized AI models will probably only work when, say, there's like a DAO operated by an AI agent or something, or like when the catalyzation of many of the ways that we interact with crypto probably become like not human based, and I think people are forced to use it, and not that they want to necessarily.
I think like I look at Filecoin, and I was at Davos of all places, and like it's a very weird crypto ecosystem in Davos where you have like Hedera, Filecoin, and Casper Labs. Like that's and Coinbase. Like that's the reality for much of the business finance world in Europe of blockchain, which is like a mind fuck. But the reason was Filecoin maxed out the Web3 ecosystem as like a customer base fairly quickly, and for it to actually succeed and grow, it has to go to Web 2. And I think like where we are seeing almost like a 17, 18 resurgence where the technology is finally viable to build things. And I think that's what we're seeing in RWAs, in DeepIn, is that people are building things for the real world. And maybe this is unpopular because it's not that everything we're building is going to be for these degens and for these like Web3 native companies. I think the market, the stable market that's going to have actual revenues for people that are investing like hard research and time into is going to be like the traditional Web 2 space. And a lot of these projects are going to be trying to serve them. And I think it's with the decentralized compute. I think it's with like open source models. Like that's going to be a big source of the path forward.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.